Hi guys, so today's video is going to be both a non-spoiler book review and then a spoilery chat for The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. This is a very well-loved fantasy story that follows a merry band of misfits, and they happen to be thieves. And what sets this story apart from a lot of other stories with similar character types is that they are thieves not because they are trying to steal from the rich and give to the poor or anything like that, and they're not thieves because they're out to get rich. They are thieves because in their world there is a set of 12 gods and goddesses, and they follow the nameless 13th, who happens to be the god of stealing. From the time that they were very young, our main characters have learned the art and craft of stealing, but as the story progresses, they start to discover that their line of work does not match up with the antagonists, and some pretty terrible stuff ensues. When it comes to the world building, I do think that Scott Lynch knows his world and the city of Camor inside and out, and I think there are a lot of instances throughout the book where he gives you so much detail. He gives you extremely lush descriptions from what things look like, the buildings, the lore of something, a story behind something, to the customs, to the colors of the clothes they're wearing. He has thought through everything. I don't think it's fair to try and insist that any of these descriptions were done without purpose, that he just wanted to make it clear that he's thought through his world or anything like that. I really feel that his purpose in pretty much every description that he wrote was meant to engross the reader into the story, to help them visualize all those sorts of things. But I am the kind of reader that regardless of whether you're a plot or a character-driven reader, let's say the plot is getting really interesting and things are moving along and I'm feeling really gripped by it. Or let's say the characters are going through something really serious and I'm worried for them, I'm scared for them. Anything of that sort is happening. And then you have an interlude where you give me an entire, just kind of this random story about, and this actually happened in the book, you get a story about a sports game and how the sports game was called a certain way, and the losing group ended up holding a grudge against the person that made a certain call that made them lose the game. And so this whole story, the whole purpose of it is for you to understand how important revenge is to the people of this city. And that is kind of tied to the characters wanting revenge for things that happened. But I don't want an entire interlude dedicated to this particular story about the city and about other people that aren't our characters. That just doesn't pull me in anymore, and it doesn't make me think like, oh, interesting, I really like how that was done. And I think other people will. So this is kind of why I feel like in book reviews, everything is so subjective. That sort of thing happened several times throughout the book where you learn about something in the city and then you went back to the characters and it just doesn't pull me in anymore. It doesn't make me personally feel connected to the story, but I can see why other people feel that when you talk about world building with the story, they're like, oh yeah, this one, it's great. I do think that particular element that I just described touches on the storytelling format, which is often, he does sort of interrupt his own story to either give you these other stories that have to do with the city or with more random side characters, or he gives you flashbacks to our main characters, or he'll give you flashbacks to things that are only happening, 20, 30 minutes or earlier that day. He plays around with storytelling formats, and I think in some instances it was clever, and in some instances I think that it made certain reveals more interesting than if he had just delivered it in a straightforward way. But I usually lean toward straightforward storytelling. I am not by any means against the use of flashbacks. I do think flashbacks can be done really well. There are a lot of times when things have happened to characters that impacts how they are in present day, and if you just had them tell somebody or think back on something, it might not be as impactful to the reader as if you were to show them having these things happen to them in their childhood or early adulthood. I think flashbacks can be used really well. I was really engaged with the flashbacks early on in the story, the formal flashbacks, because there are those other ones kind of at the beginning where it's only a little bit of time difference. The formal flashbacks show our main characters as children. I actually really enjoyed those flashbacks at the beginning of the story, but the more that we got them, the less I cared, because I felt they stopped turning into showing me things about the characters, and they kind of were just a different way of telling me about something that the characters were going to do that I could have been told they were going to do in present day. A non-spoiler example, at one point, so the kids are all the main characters as kids. They're getting to know each other. They're learning the craft of stealing. And at one point, you're told that the character is going to live on a farm outside the city, and he's going to know the ways of those people so that if he ever has to take on a certain disguise, and that disguise has anything to do with this group of people, he knows their way of life. He knows how they differ from those people in the city, which is all really intelligent. And I was thinking, oh, okay, we're going to see him living in this part of their country, and we're going to follow him learn these things. But instead, it's literally just, you go to this flashback, he's told he's going to live there, and then the next time you see him, he's back. So I don't really know what purpose that really served in flashback form, because if you had told me this in present day, that at one time he had lived all over different places to learn all these different customs, that would have done the same thing for me. We get lots of those. We get quite a few of those in the past. And so by having these occur so many times, I felt that they actually did a disservice to my reading experience, because they started to happen when things were getting really intense, as you would expect as the story progresses. And because these characters are schemers, and turns out their enemy's a schemer too, things start moving, things start going really fast, terrible things start happening. And then I get a flashback where I'm like, you're gonna go live on a farm. Okay, but like I never see him go live on the farm, so it wasn't emotionally impactful, and it could have happened earlier, and maybe I would have not felt this way, but sometimes the placement of those flashbacks, they just really caught me off guard, because I was really wanting to stick to the intense stuff in present day. I also found a couple of times that the flashbacks, the point that they served was to give context for the reader as to what was transpiring literally right at that moment in present day. So there's, throughout the beginning part of the story, there's references to some magical things, but you don't really have any elaboration. And so you don't really have an idea of, well, are the magic users dangerous? What can the magic users do in this world? Later, it becomes very important because stuff starts happening with magic users. And right as that moment occurs, you get a flashback. The character's mentor figure fills him in on everything to do with magic users. So it's kind of like, it's like the narrator is kind of talking to the reader and saying, hey, reader, here's everything you need to know about magic users. Then you go back to present day, and it's like, now you're caught up. I didn't really love that. I would have preferred having more of the information given to me throughout the beginning of the story. Maybe it would have made the beginning a little slower, but I rather would have that information presented to me. And then I feel the stakes are higher, because then I'm thinking, well, these people are dangerous. Is that what's going on? Is this what's happening? Oh my gosh, there's something going on with these magic people. And then I would have cared. I would have been freaking out. And instead it was like, it happened. And I was like, okay. And then I got a flashback. I'm like, all right, now I'm filled in. On top of that, I didn't really feel that I cared about these characters, meaning I didn't like them. I cared about their well-being to an extent. That's not even true. I didn't like the characters. And I think that's a huge thing for me when reading a story that it's kind of a, you gotta love these characters sort of a story, and you don't love them from a personal level. I just didn't like them. It makes it so much harder for me to get into the story. I liked them more learning about their childhood initially, but then them in present day, except for when really terrible things were happening, sometimes I was kind of rooting against our heroes. And I don't think that's what you were supposed to be doing in the story. But there's one moment where there's two moments where the antagonist tells the character that he's dumb. And I'm like, yes, he is dumb. I mentioned this flashback where you get filled in on the magic users. And during this flashback, you get told, do not mess with them, stay on their good side, do not get on their bad side. This is being told directly to the character that is interacting with the magic users in present day. And then you go back to present day, and the first thing he does is starts cussing him out. And I'm like, what? So why would you do that? He's not in a position of power at that moment. He has no way of getting out of this situation. And his first thought after you just got told, hey, don't piss them off, is to piss them off. And I'm like, dude, play it cool, man. There were also multiple times throughout the story when our characters were not in the best of health, or they had just endured something really traumatic, something really serious, and they really badly want to try and right the wrongs of what's been occurring. And in that way, you're like, you can root for them. Their desire to get back out there and do something, you root for them. But at one point, one of the characters goes to leave, and then his friend says, oh, you have a plan? And he's like, no. He has no plan and he's just gonna wing it. And then we see him fail at winging it for a while. You get like 2 times him trying to accomplish something, and he has this whole little scheme and this whole little story, and then you see him fail. Then he tries to do a very similar version of that story, and he fails. And I appreciate it, I will say. I appreciate that not everything was handed to him, but in this particular instance, there was a little part of me that's like, you could have summed that up. And this is a kind of long book. My copy is 720 pages, and a lot of the things that didn't work for me, I think I'm feeling the way I'm feeling about them because if they weren't done I don't like saying in excess because it's of course a personal thing. If they weren't done the amount of times they were done, then I might not have felt this way. If it were a shorter book, I probably wouldn't feel this way. But I had to kind of stick with the character for a while after he was in a position where he probably shouldn't have gone out and done stuff because he's injured. Then he goes out and does stuff without a plan, tries the first plan that comes to mind, doesn't work, tries it again, doesn't work again. Then he's like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. And his third plan really screws a guy over. And I was reading it and I'm like, what? Like the thing that he ends up, this poor guy, for those of you that have read it, I'll get into it in the spoilers, but it's a waiter, basically. He screws this guy's life up immensely. And I'm like, I don't like this scheme. You couldn't have come up with something else. Your whole life has been dedicated into scheming people, into coming up with really clever plans. The only plan you can come up with screws that guy's life up forever and puts a target on his back. Like, that sucks. I do feel the need to make very clear that this is considered grimdark from most things I've seen. And it's very common in grimdark that your heroes are not these perfect little angels making perfect decisions that save everyone and they're only good and good will prevail. I am very aware of that. And I have read grimdark stories, and I've read stories that aren't even grimdark where characters have to make really difficult decisions that have negative effects on other people, and you're like, man, that sucks. I don't know what I would do in that position. But I guess what kind of bothered me, not in like an objective, like this is what this character's bad or something, but for me personally, what bothered me about some of the decisions these characters made is that I swear there could have been another way. I do want to add as well, and I think that this, hopefully people aren't offended by this comparison. I think in some ways the tone of the story is very lighthearted. It doesn't take itself too seriously. And the thing that comes to mind, the movie, The Princess Bride, how it's sometimes really over the top, it's sometimes really ridiculous, and it's fun. It's such a good time. And I kind of imagine The Princess Bride, but every now and then, the most horrifying, disgusting, violent thing you can think of, like having a scene thrown in the middle of all this jolly silliness. I feel like that's kind of what the story was like, and I don't know that that combination works for me, and I think it's gonna work. I think that's why this book is so loved by so many other people, because that combination does work for a lot of other people. If you're a fan of this series, feel free to tell other people, like, that's a stupid comparison, don't listen, or be like, yeah, that's a great comparison. But the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I like really, really silly, really fun, really over the top and ridiculous. And then I can read other stories that get really dark and really heavy. I can read those things too. But for some reason, the overlap, the combination of those two things felt very jarring for me. And I think that the way the characters are in the story are a reflection of this combination. And I just don't think it clicked for me. There's one more thing that I will say in the non-spoiler part that I think will be helpful, hopefully, to a lot of you who are wanting to pick this up. And I'm hoping if it sounds interesting to you that you still want to pick it up, because please do. But the last thing I want to add is that I have seen some people who felt similarly to me about the writing style of the story, which is extremely informal, surprisingly so for something sold in adult fantasy. There's a lot of the extra use of letters, meaning the word A-H, they'll have lots of H's, or a lot of exclamation points, a lot of parentheses, a lot of italics, a lot of ellipses. So if you are the kind of person that finds those sorts of things sort of distract you in the physical form, check out the audiobook. I did like the narrator quite a bit. I've seen other people who ended up loving this book but didn't care for the writing style. So if the story sounds good to you, but you're not sure you're a fan of that style either, maybe check out the audiobook. I am going to get into some spoilers now, so if you haven't read this and you don't want to be spoiled, don't keep watching. But I just want to say to those of you who have read it, okay, Scott Lynch, I'm very serious when I say I truly think that he has thought through so much about Camorra, about this world, because I was sitting there thinking the whole thing with the horse urine, that was super gross, really gross. And I'm like, how do you get like a barrel full of horse urine? How do you do that? Aren't horses finicky? And then I thought about it. I'm like, oh, it was probably a gentled horse. Man, he really does think of everything. And I was like, in my head, kind of applauding him because I'm like, that's super gross, man. But there is a way in your world. The thing that I was referencing, in case it's been a while since you've read it and you're like, what is she even talking about? When it comes to I was about to say Scott Lynch. Scott Lynch didn't screw anyone over. When it comes to Locke screwing someone over, he ends up saying like, oh, he was part of an assassination attempt on you. I'm so sorry to say. And he's like, what? The rich guy's like, no way, but I helped him and his family and stuff like that. And then he comes in and he's like, is everything this man says is true? Because earlier Locke was like, if he asks you, you have to say it's true. And the guy's like, yes, he's crying. And he's like, yes, it's true. I'm like, dude, this sucks, this poor guy. And I mean, at least Locke lets him out later. And he's like, leave the city though. Like, no, you're going to get killed if you stay here. I'm like, that sucks, man. You ruined this guy's entire life. I don't know. That made it really hard for me to like Locke. And that wasn't the first time that he did something I found annoying. I mentioned the whole magic user thing and the bonds mage. And like, as soon as he gets captured by the bonds mage, and you just got this flashback of Chain saying, don't piss them off. And he's like, F you guys, or whatever he said. He just flips out and is like, meh, at them. And they're like, you really don't want to mess with us. And I'm like, you really don't. Because later, the guy, once again, the bonds mage is like, you seem a little dull. And then he starts like torturing him with magic. And he's like, ah. And I'm like, yeah, man. Don't piss him off. Like, I get when he leaves, you guys can scheme and figure out how to get back at him because he seems pretty evil. But in the meantime, play it cool. I also found before he succeeded, I keep wanting to say Lynch, before Locke succeeded in getting the clothes from the rich man, the 2 times that he tried and failed to get clothes from those other guys, I was like, I could have just been told he tried twice and tried to explain he made up this elaborate plan and it didn't work. And I say this because later, toward the end of the story, he basically bribed the guards sort of thing. And it was just like, he did this and he paid them enough money that it was very clear, like, okay, don't tell anybody. And I'm like, yeah, that's all I needed earlier. And I'm being extra picky because this was a long book. And when things were really starting to heat up, a lot of times there would be a flashback or there would be this like anecdote or something. And I'm like, I want to get back to the other stuff. The other stuff is exciting, but now it's not as exciting because you pushed pause. You pushed pause for a while and told me other stuff. I actually enjoyed quite a few of, I guess you could call them side characters. Pretty much none of our main people, everyone on the outside that they interacted with, like the spider, I often found those people really captivating and interesting. I liked her a lot. I didn't like, though, that when he was poisoned by her and she had the thing that was going to, heal him, and she's like, if you cooperate, I'll give this to you. And he's like thinking about it. He's like, she's just so used to being obeyed and getting her way and people not knowing who she is that she's become a little privileged, and I'm just gonna punch her in the face. And that kind of annoyed me because I was like, that was too easy. Aren't I the biggest brat ever? Because over here I'm like, oh, don't show me fail, like him failing for so long. And then over here I'm like, that was too easy. I more just mean that I was hoping there would be some way, I don't know, even if that lady's adopted son was in the room and he had to fight his way to get that, and then he jumped, and because that guy's scared of heights, because that guy was scared of heights, if he ran off after him but then like wouldn't pursue him because he was terrified or something, the tone of like him punching the old lady in the face, I feel like that feeling, the like hilarity of what just happened, I feel like you still would have had some of that if this really big tough guy who's so caring for this old lady runs after Locke and then he's like, the heights though, and then like wouldn't pursue him. I feel like that would have been in line with the humor of the book. Another example was just, so when he's fighting the the main antagonist at the very end. Locke is fighting the Grey King. And he basically tricks him by being like, I just have to hold you here until Jean comes. That's like kind of a throwback to the flashback where that's what he did as a kid. But when he did that as a kid, it was kind of known that his friend had this reputation of beating people up like bloody. He could just destroy everybody. And these kids in this other gang knew it because he'd beat them up before. But the Grey King, like, doesn't have this reference of, oh yeah, Jean like beat me up a lot. Oh no, he's coming. Oh no, like he doesn't have that like the kids did in the gang. So when he was like, he's coming, and Locke says this, and then the Grey King for a second like, looks behind him, and then that's when Locke, because he's so witty and clever, stabs him, and then he wins. I would have rather Jean had shown up because he's just such a loyal friend and he came anyway, and then he like, I don't know, he killed him, and Locke did the like, I just have to wait till he gets here, but doesn't announce that's what he's doing, and he's like thinking it, and then Jean shows up, and then they take out the Grey King together. I think I would have preferred that. The Grey King, for me, the last little bit when he's waiting for Locke to show up, and you get this little passage, and he's remembering his parents dying, his siblings being killed, and he's just with his two sisters. I kind of wish that this story had been like flashbacks, and you have one Locke, one boy going down this path and sort of leading to a good life, where you have this other character who has something bad happen and it leads him down a bad path, and then they come together, and then you kind of care about both of them. I feel like we really could have cared about the Grey King, because that one little passage I was like, man, is this guy gonna live? Because he could be really fascinating. And then he didn't. He died immediately after that. But I would have really liked a story like that. I think that the parallels between those two characters could have been really interesting to explore. I would have much preferred some of the flashbacks to be about him and his family. And I think that could have been really interesting. I think it could have been really cool. Obviously, that's not what happened. Locke is confronting him before the final showdown, and it's like, dude, you know the pain of losing innocent people in your life. How could you possibly do this? And he's like, you don't think I've thought about that before? And like, that's his only answer. And I'm like, okay, well, but now you just like feel like a cartoon to me, because he feels like that. I feel bad saying that, but like as a villain, he had the potential to have so much depth, but his plan toward the end, like the plan was just bigger and bigger and bigger. And I think that definitely created this sense of urgency at the end, where you like want to get to the end and you want to see like, oh my gosh, how's Locke gonna convince everybody, especially with his like all this stuff, right? So I get, for that sake, it definitely made the ending very fast paced, but it made the villain for me not as, he didn't have as much depth as he could have. He could have had so much depth. And then I kind of wanted him to not have these grand schemes. I wanted him to have this list of people that he wanted his vengeance on. And then I wanted him to live. I wanted him to be the kingpin to Daredevil. Like that's what I wanted, this showdown, sort of a relationship between these characters. And he just got to be a little too like, I'm going to destroy this whole city for my taste. I know a lot of you really love this book. So I'm sure I have been really frustrating for a lot of you right now. And I want all of you that love this book, because I don't want anybody to not want to read a book after they hear me talk about it. And hopefully, if they haven't read it, they didn't keep watching the spoilers. But if you love the book, please sing its praises. Talk about how great you think it is. Talk about how good the world building is. Talk about how much you love Locke, how much you love his friendship with Jean. Talk about all these things, because it didn't work for me, but so much of what didn't work for me was so obviously just personal preference. And I know a lot of people love this book, so if you love it, try your darndest to like get everything I said, just slam it down. That's it. I'm gonna stop talking now, because I've probably upset a lot of people. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching. Bye.